Welcome back to another LP Gallery tutorial. Today we're going to do a Christmas theme with a focus on creating textures. Now, as you know, when we create objects, we like to create them very realistically. Now, one way to create things realistically is to create a realistic texture that's applied to that object. So let's take a look at this. So let's start off with the Christmas stocking. So here we have a nice Christmas stocking. We have the symbols and text, and you can see that they wrap nicely around it to make it look very round, very three-dimensional. Now, if we take a look at the pattern, you can see this is a very nice weave pattern. So it definitely looks like some kind of woven cloth pattern. So that's what we're trying to get. This is a Christmas stocking made of some type of cloth pattern, and we want it to look like that. Now, if we take a look at the trim, I want the trim to look like it's more like a wool pattern. So if you look at this, you can see it doesn't look like the textile pattern here. It looks more like it's wool, and it should be different than the body of the Christmas stocking. So I want this to look like wool, and I want this to look like a nice woven textile pattern. Now, if we take a look at the candy canes, they should look like candy canes. They should be striped, and they should be very hard looking and very smooth, because that's what candy canes look like. Now, if we take a look at the mittens here, well, we have a very nice pair of knitted mittens. So the material clearly looks like it's a knitted type of material. So it looks very different than the stocking itself. So clearly it's a different kind of material. Now, if we take a look at the scarf, you can see we're using a different knitted pattern here. So it's a very different material. It's different than the mitts. It's different than the Christmas stocking. So we want this to look like a knitted pattern, and it does. Now, if you take a look at the text and the symbols in all these, you'll notice that they're all part of the texture of the object. It's not like we took text and just faded it into the background. That never works. That's why if you try to take a picture from the internet of a Christmas stocking and type your own text, that's not going to work, because the text will be a flat color and you have a texture of the object. And the only way to make the texture come through the text or symbol would be to fade it. And if you fade that, the text and symbol ends up getting dull, not bright, and the pattern underneath the text and symbol gets muddy. It doesn't really stand out. There's no real way to just take text and put it on top of a picture, especially when it has a texture, and hope that it works out. But the way we create this, you can see that the text symbols are all part of the pattern. So they look like they were created at the same time. Now, how we accomplish that is we actually create things in like 3 layers. We create the object first, we add the coloring and everything to that. Then we create the text and or symbols. And then we create the textile pattern. So the textile pattern is actually on top of everything. And then we put it all together. Now, because the textile pattern is on top of the object, everything gets integrated into the textile pattern. So the text and symbols will take that pattern. So that's basically how it's done. Now, the last thing I'll show you is the text area. I've tried to make the text area look like a tablecloth. So it looks like it's got some kind of weave pattern in here. So I'm trying to make everything with texture, particularly with textile type textures. Okay, so again, the only thing that's not created from scratch is the brick. So that's actually a photograph. It's a brick wall that we're going to turn into a fireplace. Okay, so that is our goal. So let's get started. Okay, the first thing to create is our Christmas stocking. Now, the Christmas stockings basically come in one of 2 kind of shapes. There's the kind of wide boot shape one that's more like a bag with a foot part to it, and there's more of a trimmed version that's more like a stocking. So we'll do both, and you can decide which one you want to use. I'm going to stick more to the stocking, but we'll do both of them. Okay, so I'm going to go to my shapes, and I'm going to go to flowchart. I'm going to go to my delay shape. I'm going to draw that. And I'm going to rotate it. I want the flat part to the top. And I'm going to duplicate that, and this part will be the toe part. So I'm going to rotate that. I'll just bring it in again, kind of like that. Okay, now I want to create a bit of a heel. To do that, I'm going to go to my shapes, and I'm going to go to my flowchart. I'm going to take this one, the stored data. That makes a nice little heel. And we'll just do that. We'll rotate it. And I'll just rotate it a bit like this. And I'm going to drag it up. Now what I want is I want my heel to be a little bit lower than the toe. Okay, so I want to kind of line up, but I want the heel to be a little bit lower. Okay, Now to see if that looks good, I'm going to select all this. I'm going to go to my merge shape, do the union first, check it out. I think it looks pretty good. I'm going to do the union on that. So that's kind of your typical big blocky boot kind of bag shape one. So we'll put that to the side. Now I want to create one more streamlined. So I'm going to create one that looks more like a stocking. Now we're going to look for more of a curve shape to create the Christmas sock because it has a little more of a curve. To do that, we're going to go to our shapes. We're going to go to our stars and banners, and we're going to grab the wave shape. So I'm going to draw a wave, and I'm going to rotate it. Now I don't want such a sharp curve like this, so I'm going to flatten the curve. So I'm going to grab my shape panel, just drag it to the right so it's slightly flattened. Okay, now I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to rotate it horizontally so that it mirrors the shape there. Okay, and I'm going to hold my shift key, drag it back so we get something like that. I'm going to select both of these, do a merge, do a union. I'm going to go back to rotate, and I want to flip it vertically so it's wide at the top. The idea of having wide at the top is going to make it look like it's really stuffed with goodies at the top. So we have it slightly wider at the top. Okay, it looks pretty good. To create the foot shape, we just go and grab our delay shape again. We're going to rotate that. Now, to keep with the curve of the sock, I want to bring this to the bottom like this. So if it's more at the bottom, then we get kind of a nice curve that comes right into this like that. So I kind of like that. I'm going to just rotate it down a bit more. And that looks pretty good. Now to create our heel, we're going to just use the delay shape again. And I'm going to flatten this a bit. That gives us more of a rounded heel rather than a square heel like that. And we're going to rotate this. And I'm going to bring that in. And what I'm going to do with the foot part is I'm going to rotate it down a bit and drag it down. So the heel kind of goes straight and then comes down to the foot part. Okay, we're going to take this, just drag it down a bit. It looks pretty good. And I think I'll just flatten that a bit up there. Okay, now we're going to see what that looks like. We're going to select all this. And we're going to go to our shape. We're going to pause on the union and see how that looks. And I think that looks like a pretty good sock shape. So I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to give that a click, and it looks pretty good. Okay, now I'm going to curve the top part a bit. So I'm going to grab my stored data. And that just helps with the idea of volume. So when we create our object, when we add our text and shapes to it, we want to make sure it's following the roundness of it. So this will help with the idea of roundness. We're going to click here, click there, merge, do subtract, and we get a little more roundness there. Okay, now the next thing is, you notice that the rotation handle is to an angle. It's not pointing straight. Now everything we create has to have the rotation handle pointing straight, not at an angle. So this is not good for us. We need the rotation handle pointing straight. Now to do that, all we have to do is use the intersect merge option. Now whenever you use the merge shape options, the first shape you click on always takes precedent. So I'm going to draw a rectangle. And the rectangle just has to be a little bigger than the sock shape. It doesn't matter how much bigger. It could be the size of the slide. It just has to be bigger than the sock shape. Now I'm going to make that a different color just so you can see it. I'm going to send that to the back. Okay, so the rectangle I click on first. It has a rotation handle to the top, so that takes precedence. I hold my shift key, I click on the sock shape, I go to my merge, and I do an intersect. Now intersect only keeps the overlap. So the sock is overlapping the rectangle, so it'll keep. So we click on the intersect, and now we have a rotation handle to the top. So again, it's very important that the rotation handle is always to the top of everything we do. Okay, so I'm going to make that red. Get rid of the outline, and we're going to stretch it out a bit. And that looks pretty good. Okay, so by having a wider top here, it's also going to give the illusion that the Christmas stocking is stuffed with goodies at the top. So that's why we also have it wider at the top. Okay, so the next thing now is to create our text and symbols and have them wrapping around, or have the illusion that they're wrapping around. Okay, so that's the next thing to do. Now, as previously mentioned, we kind of do this in layers. So the sock shape represents the first layer. Then the text and symbols will be the second layer. So we're about to start the second layer. I think I'm going to add a little bit of white to the toe of the sock and white to the heel. That's something you commonly see in these socks, so I'd like to do that. So I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to grab my stored data shape, and it's one of the few shapes that has this concave kind of curve to it, so it works well for this. And we're going to just put one like there, and we'll take a duplicate here, and we'll rotate that. We'll try to get as close as we can. I don't want the tips coming into the sock like this, so we'll try to get as close as we can. So we're going to click on the sock. We're going to hold the shift, click on this shape, and we're going to go to our merge shapes, and we're going to do a fragment. A fragment keeps all shapes, including the overlap shapes. So we click on fragment, and then we get rid of the shapes we don't need. Don't need that. Don't need that. Don't need that. We just get these shapes. Okay, I'm going to select both of them, and we'll make them white, and we'll just add them in. Okay, that looks pretty good. Okay, now we'll start with our symbols. And again, it's up to you what you want to put in here. Now I'm going to just use a snowflake symbol. That's part of the wingding sets. But you can actually find online Christmas symbols, so you can actually use all kinds of Christmas symbols and make this really Christmassy. But I'm going to just use what we already have. So I'm going to click on my text box. I'm going to click here, go to Insert, go to Symbol, and under Wingdings, you see the snowflake. So I'm going to click it, and I'm going to just insert it a couple times so we get 3 of them. Okay, I'm going to highlight these, and I'd like them to be white. Okay, now how this is going to work is we're going to turn it into a word art. So we go to Shape Format, Text Effects, Transform. These are all word art shapes. And the 2 we're going to use is ring inside and ring outside. Now we're going to do the ring outside. Now what you notice is this. When you create a bunch of symbols or text, half of it goes to the front, half of it goes to the back. So what I really like is about 4 or 5 symbols to be in the front. So that means I have to duplicate these. So right now I've got 3. So what I'm going to do is just copy this. I think maybe 5. So I'm going to take copy 2 of those, and I'm going to paste. Now, if I do this, I'm going to get, again, 2 in the front, 2 in the back, and 1 right to the edge. So I want like at least 5 in the front. So what I need to do is, of course, copy all 5, and I'm going to put a space and paste those in. Okay, and if you get any extra enters, just backspace them out. Now, if you get any text wrapping, you have to remove the text wrapping. So you go to Text Options, you go to the text box, and make sure that this is not checked. Wrap text. You do not want wrapping of any kind. So if it does wrap, just uncheck that. Okay, it looks pretty good. Now if we go back, transform, ring outside, we get something that looks like that. Okay, it looks pretty good. Now, of course, we only want the front. We don't want the back objects. So I'm going to select the back objects. Now, you either click and drag to select them, or you can use the shift and the arrow keys. Okay, now, we don't want to fill in that, so I'm going to say no fill. Okay, so we can just position this. We can grab the shape handle. We can straighten it out, or make it a little more curved. We can stretch it down, and that looks pretty good. So I'm going to put it up here, stretch it out, and we don't have to worry about the parts that go off. So if a little bit of the design goes off, we don't have to worry about that. Okay, so I've got one there. I'm going to duplicate that, make another one down here. And again, I'm not going to worry about the parts that go off. You'll see why later on. So just make another one down here. And that looks pretty good. Okay, it kind of gets the idea that it's going around something. Okay, and again, we don't have to worry about the parts of the shapes that go off. Okay, so now I'm going to create the text. So I'm going to grab a text box. I'm going to click here. Of course, one of the great things about doing your own clip art is you can customize this. So if you're doing this for your company, you're doing it for your community, your school, type the company name, the school name, or so you can really customize this. Here I'm going to just type the words "Let It Snow." And I'm going to select this. I want to change the font. I'm going to use a font called Hobo. Now you can use any font you like. I like this font a lot. And of course I'm going to make it white. And just like before, I want this to be in the front, so I have to duplicate that and have one in the back. So I'm going to select this. I'm going to copy that, can put a space, and I'm going to paste. Get rid of any extra enters like that. Go back to my shape, go back to my text effect, go to transform. We're going to do the ring outside again, and we get something like that. Stretch it down, and we take the back one, and we say no fill, and we're going to put that in there, and just bring it in a bit. And again, it looks like it's wrapping around, so it looks pretty good. Put one there. We'll bring it in a bit. And again, we're not going to worry about the parts that go over. You'll see why. That'll all be cut off anyways, so we don't have to worry about that. It looks pretty good. I'll just move these up a bit. Okay, and I'm going to put one more text in there. So I'm going to grab that one, duplicate it, and we'll put it maybe down here. And I'll just bring it in a bit. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to take these symbols. I'm going to duplicate these symbols, and we're going to rotate them. Now, you see we have the ring going this way, so we have to change the ring style. So we're going to go back, text effect, transform, and I want this one, ring on the inside. So that looks more like it's going over the foot part like that. It looks pretty good. And I'll do one more. And I think that looks pretty good. And again, we don't have to worry about the parts that are going to go over. Okay, so now we've got the first layer, we've got the second layer, and now we create the third layer. The third layer is the actual textile effect. Now, before you create that third layer, which is going to be the textile layer, I'm going to take a look at my symbols and my text, make sure I have them the way I want them. So what I'm going to do, I think, is take the text and just bring it in a little more so you can read it. And I'll do the same with this one. Now again, the symbols, we don't have to worry about too much, okay? Whatever is going to overlap here, as you see here, doesn't matter. You're going to get rid of it when you do the final stage. Okay, so to create this third layer, I'm going to need the sock shape. So I'm going to try to click on the sock. You have to try to find an area where you can actually click on, because now you have all the text and symbols on top. It makes it a little hard to actually click on the sock, but I've got it there. So I'm going to hold my control and drag so I can make a duplicate, and we get that. Okay, so our nice textile pattern is going to be made with the pattern fills. So I'm going to click on my pattern fill. Now the pattern I'd like to use is this one called zigzag, but I want it to be black and white. It needs to be a strong pattern. So I'm going to click on this, make it black. Now the problem with the pattern fills is that there's no way to make them transparent. Now remember, the pattern fill is acting as the third layer. So it's going to go on top, and it has to be transparent so you can see through it. Well, pattern fills do not have the ability to go transparent. It's not like a solid color or a gradient. So what we have to do is we have to copy the pattern fill and paste it into the shape as a picture. Once we do that, then you can control the transparency. So I'm going to grab a rectangle and basically do that again. Make sure the rectangle is bigger than the shape that you need to put it in. And I'm going to go to my pattern fill, do the exact same thing. And I want that to be black and white. And we don't need the outline. Okay, so now I take this, I copy it, and I paste it into here. Now, if you're not familiar with this, when you copy and paste pattern fills as pictures, the pattern often changes. It gets thicker, or the pattern itself can change. So if I were to take this and copy it and paste it as a picture, you'll see that it gets much thicker than the original pattern. And that's actually to our benefit. So don't be surprised when that happens. Okay, so I'm going to take this, I'm going to copy it, I'm going to click here on our shape, I'm going to go to picture texture, clipboard, and you get the thicker pattern. Now that you got a thicker pattern, you can now control the transparency. So here's your transparency, because again, the pattern is now a picture within the shape. So anywhere between 65 to 75%, and that depends on the pattern you choose. Let's say 70% looks good. Okay, so now we put it on top, and we have a nice semi-transparent pattern. Now that's not quite what I want. It kind of does look like a weave pattern, but that's not quite what I want. Okay, now just to give you an idea how this is going to work, I'm going to select all this, and I'm going to copy and paste it as a picture. Now, to actually create the next textile pattern, we either use the artistic effects on the finished shape here or on the pattern. We can do it two ways, depending on which gives us a better result. So I'm going to go to my artistic effects. Now, not all the artistic effects are going to work well with this. There's only a small handful, and that will depend on what pattern fill we chose. So paint strokes works not too bad. Cement, texturizer, and the last one would be pastel smooth. So these will work, but it depends on the pattern and the finished product. So if we go here, try paint strokes, it's not going to work that well on the finished product here. Okay, now if we try cement, it's not too bad. You get a pattern, not quite what we want. We try texturizer, well, you get kind of a knit pattern. You can see that there. Still not quite what we want. Now we go to pastel, we get something that looks like that. And again, not quite what we want. We do get a nice pattern, you can see it there, but we get kind of a blurry pattern. So not quite what we want. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this. So what happens if you try this to the pattern itself? So we're going to copy the pattern, paste it as a picture. Okay, we get a thicker pattern. Now let's try the same thing, but on the pattern. So let's go to Artistic Effects. Let's try this one here. We're going to go to Paint Strokes, and we get quite an interesting pattern. And then we can grab this, the intensity, move back and forth. Now let's try another effect. So we can try the cement. That's not too bad. We can try texturizer, not much difference. But the best one for this pattern is actually one called pastels. Now when you do that with the pastels and you take the scaling over, and when you do that, you get something that looks very close to a perfect little weave pattern. So that looks pretty good. So let's take this, let's copy that, let's click here, and let's paste that in there, clipboard. And when you take a look at that, you can see you have a very nice natural looking weave pattern. Now what I'm going to do is go to my picture format here, go to my corrections, and I'm going to sharpen that up a bit. That will make the pattern stand out a bit more. But if you take a close look, it looks like a natural weave pattern. So it works out pretty good. So not all the pattern fills will work for this, and not all the artistic effect combinations will work for this. So it's just a matter of playing with some of them and see what you like. But this one is guaranteed to give you a natural knitted type pattern. Now I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to rotate the pattern a little bit, so not so straight coming down like this. It looks too obvious that you pasted something in there. So what I'm going to do is take this pattern and just rotate it just a little bit. I have to make sure, of course, when you rotate that it's going to fit. So I'm going to have to stretch it a bit, make sure it's bigger than the shape. Okay, so now I'm going to take this, copy it. I'm going to click in here. We're going to paste from the clipboard, and we're going to tell it to tile. And we need to center it. Under alignment, you need to center it. Okay? And there it is. So I think at a slight rotation, it just gives it a little more volume. Makes the sock look like it's more rounded. So I think the rotation is just a little better than the straight pattern. Now, the pastel artistic effect works with almost any of the pattern fills. So you'll probably get something very similar to this with almost any of the pattern fills. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to get rid of it. Okay, now obviously this doesn't work with the snowflakes coming off the shape. We have to confine it to the shape. To do that, we're going to click on the top layer. I'm going to duplicate that. I'm going to take the transparency off, so we have that. So what I'm going to do now with this is I'm going to copy all this and paste it into this shape. So it's going to go into that shape as a picture. So what's going to happen to the snowflakes that are hanging over the shape? Well, if this gets copied and pasted into here, they have to follow the shape outline. That means they're all going to get cut off because it's going to just follow the shape outlines. Now I can't just copy this shape and paste it directly into this shape. And here's why. When I click on this shape, we'll notice the bounding box fits the shape perfectly. But if I were to select all this and copy that, you'll notice that the bounding box here will be much larger because it has to incorporate all the shape down here. So it's going to be a taller picture than what this is. So if we were to copy that and paste it in here, we have a taller thing going into here, and it's going to distort, and it won't fit perfectly. What we have to do is copy the shape, paste it as a picture, and we have to crop out all the extra space so the bounding box is exactly the same as this one. So we're going to do that. We got it selected. We're going to copy, paste as a picture. Okay, and there it is. And you can see there's that extra space. So it's never going to fit in here without distorting. So we have a little bit of extra space on the right and a little bit on the bottom. So we right click, crop, and again, the bounding boxes have to be the same. So we're going to go right to the edge, to the bottom, and to the right. Right to the edge. You don't obviously want to cut into it. Go just to the edge. Now we can take this, copy it, and paste it into here. And again, we're not tiling this. We want to stretch it to make sure it fits. Now I noticed that the symbols are still kind of hanging off shape right here. So we have to fix that. So we want to spin these down. When you spin down, you stretch. When you spin up, you shrink. So the bottom we have to fix first. So we're going to spin down once, and that fixes that gap. And we're going to do that from each side. Okay, that helps us stretch the picture around the shape and makes it look a little more natural. So that looks pretty good. Okay, so let's make this a little brighter. I'm going to go to picture format. I'm going to go to color, and I'll just increase the saturation a bit. And I'll go back to color, and I'll increase the color tone a bit, make it a little bit on the yellow side, like that. That looks pretty good. And then I'm going to go to corrections, and I think I'm going to just take the contrast down just a little bit. That makes more of the pattern show through. So I'm going to click on that, and I think I kind of like that. Looks pretty good. Okay, next, let's put a little inner shadow. So I'm going to go to my effects. Here's my shadow. I'm going to use the bottom right. So we have bottom right inner shadow. And I'm going to increase the distance and increase the blur. And I'm going to change the color. I don't want it to be black. I actually have a pre-made dark brown. So I'm going to apply a nice brown to that. I think it looks pretty good. I might take the transparency down a bit. And that gives it a little more volume. Now I'm going to add another shadow, and I'm going to do it a different way. And that will really make the stocking look very three-dimensional. So what I'm going to do is duplicate this. And I'm going to give that a black fill. So I'm going to go to solid fill, just give it a black fill. And I'm going to remove the drop shadow, and I'm going to put it on top. Now what I'm going to do with the black fill is I'm going to make it very transparent. Maybe around 70, 80%, somewhere around there transparent. Now that doesn't look very good, but the trick comes through here. We'll go back to the effect, and what we're looking for is soft edges. So we click on soft edges, and we drag the slider bar over to the right. So we're softening the edges, and you can see what's happening. It's blurring that nice little shadow. Okay, and then we get to move it around. Now what that actually does is make it look a little more three-dimensional. Okay, so you can darken the shadow, lighten the shadow, make it softer, make it stronger. I'll show you the difference between with the shadow and without the shadow. Now let me just duplicate this, and let me just drag it here. Now I'll take the shadow out. So if I take the shadow out, you can see it's a lot more flatter than when you have the shadow. So adding that little shadow the way we did it just makes it a little more three-dimensional. And again, you can move it where you think it looks best. So it looks like light's coming to this way and the shadow's on this side. Okay, so this part of the stocking is done. What we have to do next is create a nice little trim on top. And again, I'm trying to make this kind of look like a wool trim around it. Now the shape we're going to use is the stored data shape. We're going to click on that from the flow chart, and we're going to drag that out, and we're going to rotate it. And we're going to stretch it out so it's a little bit wider than the stocking, and we'll just bring it down a bit like this. That looks pretty good. Now what I would like is a bit more roundness at the bottom. That'll help with the illusion of it wrapping around. So what I'm going to do is hold my Control and Shift and duplicate this and drag down. And you can see what I'm doing here. I just want right close to the bottom. So the duplicate right close to the bottom. It looks pretty good. I want to stretch the duplicate out like this. And then I'm going to drag it from the bottom, and you can see what's happening. We get more of a roundness there. You can see the roundness there. Okay, so I'm going to bring that back up. just overlap, and that gives us just a bit more roundness. So we click on this one, we click on that one, we go to shape, we go to merge, we subtract, and we get something that looks like that. Looks pretty good. So a little more roundness there, kind of like that. Now we don't need the outline, so let's get rid of the outline. And we're going to put another pattern fill. So I'm going to go to my pattern fill. And of course we want black. And the pattern that I'm going to choose is this one here called weave. So I'm going to click on that. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy and paste this as before. Copy, paste. And we get a thicker pattern. That's perfect. So what I want to do now is apply an artistic effect on this. Now I want this to be a soft effect. I want it to be a little softer. So to do that, we're going to go to artistic effects. And what I'm going to choose is this one here. If we go back to the other ones, they're going to make it a little more gritty and grainy. So we're going to go to this one here called watercolor sponge. And we get something soft like that. Now I'm going to take the brush size all the way over so we don't have the black speckles. We don't want that. Now I'm going to add a nice inner shadow. So I'm going to go to shadow and we'll do the bottom right again. And we'll just drag this up. We'll blur. And I want that nice dark brown that I made. It looks pretty good. And I'd like it to be a little more darker. And I think I might bring the blur up just a bit more. Okay, that looks pretty good. And I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to paste it as a picture. And we're going to apply a different artistic effect to this. Okay, so this is nice and soft. So let's go back to artistic effects. And the one we're going to apply is this one here called glass. So we click on glass, and now we're starting to get a pattern. We're going to take the scaling all the way over. We got a not bad pattern there, but I'm going to apply another artistic effect to this. So I have to create it again. So I'm going to copy, paste as a picture. Okay. And I'm going to apply another artistic effect. This time I'm going to use the pastels. And I'm going to drag that one way over. And I'll do it one more time. I'm going to copy, paste again. And I'm going to go back to the glass. So I'm going to go to glass. And I'm going to take the scaling all the way over. So by combining these, we get a kind of a combination of both. And that's going to look really good. Now you'll notice that we have our rotation handle to the side here. Now, if you recall, our rotation handle had to be at the top. So I can't paste this in here because it won't paste properly. So what I have to do, of course, is do the intersect. So I'm going to take this over here. I'm going to go grab a rectangle. We'll send the rectangle to the back. And now with the rectangle selected, it's got the rotation handle to the top. It'll take precedent. I'm going to hold my shift. I'm going to click on my shape, go to my merge, and we're going to do the intersect. It's important that all the rotation handles have to be at the top. Okay, that's perfect. I'm going to bring that to the front. That looks good. Okay, now we can take this, copy it, click here, go back to our fill, picture, texture, clipboard. That looks perfect. Okay, now what we're going to do with this is we're going to stretch that pattern out. Now, it doesn't really look like wool now, but when we stretch this out, and we're going to stretch it in all directions, it's going to start getting a little more rough, and it will kind of look like wool. Now, obviously, we have to get rid of the black on top and the black on the bottom. So here we are. And again, we're not tidying this. We're stretching this. Okay, so let's get rid of the black on the bottom. We'll spin down. Let's get rid of the black on top. You can see how the pattern is stretching. And we stretch in all directions. So we go right and left. Stretch there. Stretch there. So you see we have nice big stretches there. And again, we're going to stretch the top. I don't want any of the black in there if I can avoid it. And there it is. Now if you take a look at that, that looks pretty good. Let's get rid of the outline. And I think I'd like to add a nice inner shadow. So let's go back to our shadow. And we want an inner shadow. We'll do the right one again. And I'm going to make it brown. And we'll bring it up a bit. And we'll soften it with the blur. I think it looks pretty good. Something like that. Now what I'd also like is a drop shadow. Now of course you can only have one shadow. Either an inner shadow or an outer shadow. So what I'm going to do is copy this. Paste it as a picture. So it's a new object. Move that one out. And so of course this now has the inner shadow. Now we can put a drop shadow. So let's go back to our shadow and I'll do for an outer shadow. I'm going to just make the distance quite a bit, and we'll blur it a bit. We obviously don't want it going off the stocking here, so we're going to take the size down so you can see what's happening there, and then I'll just bring it back up a bit, make it a little bit darker, and you can kind of see what we're doing here. Just want a bit of a shadow, not much, just a bit of a shadow. Okay, and I think that looks pretty good. Okay, now I think what I'd like to do is sharpen this. So we'll go back to picture, corrections, and I want to make it a little bit sharper. So maybe this one right here. And I think what's going to help with the illusion of this being kind of like wool is that it should have a softness to it. Now to do that, we're going to go to our soft edge, and we're going to spin this up. Maybe 3. So when you do that, you get a fairly nice soft edge to that. That looks pretty good. Okay, so we need a little back piece here. So I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to rotate it. We're going to flip it vertically. We're going to get rid of that shadow. And we're going to send that to the back. And you can see how that fits together pretty good. And maybe I'll put an inner shadow there. Now this is upside down, and we obviously have to do the bottom because that's the bottom there. So we're going to click on that, and I'll just bring the distance up a bit. Again, we'll make it a nice dark brown. We'll blur it a bit, kind of like that. And then we can change the angle if you wanted to go more to one side or the other side. So you can always do that. And I think that looks pretty good. Now, you're not going to see the back part anyways because we're going to be putting the little mitts and the candy canes in there. But in case you want to leave it like empty, like an empty stocking, there it is. Let's get rid of all these. Okay, I kind of like that. I think for this top one, I'm going to just bring it in a bit. More like that. Makes it look a little thicker on top. And I might just bring it down a bit. So I'm going to take both of them. Use my arrow keys, just drop them down. Like that. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. I think the stocking is finished. I think the next thing we'll do is the scarf. To create our scarf, we're going to use the wave shape. So we're going to go to Stars Banners, grab the single wave. I'm going to make this scarf a little bit bigger than what we need, and then I can reduce it in size, and that'll give us a little finer detail. And we don't need a line. Let's get rid of the line. Now what we want is a green color. Now what I would really like is to have a bit of a gradient because this wave is going like this. Okay, so it should be a little brighter here, and then it goes down into the valley here. It should be a little darker and come back out light. So we're going to make that a gradient. So I'm going to click on gradient. We get the default gradient, so I'm going to set this to 0. And I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to make that green. I'm going to click on this one, make that one green. And I'm going to move these just a bit. And I want those to be green. I'm going to move more where the valley would be, so they should be a little darker. I'm going to make both of those green. I think what I'll do is just take the brightness down. So maybe for both. Okay, so it's just a little bit darker. So we're going to make this a little brighter here and a little brighter here. And we're going to do that by grabbing this and just bring it up a bit. Taking this one, bringing it up a bit. So it's a little brighter at the edges and a bit of a shadow down here. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, next we're going to create our text, and we want our text to flow along the same way as the banner. Okay, so we're going to grab our text box. And I'm going to just say Merry Christmas. You can, of course, type whatever you like. Now I'd like that to be the same hobo font that I used before. So I'm going to go here, find it. And I'd like that to be white. Okay, now this has to flow the same way the banner flows. So we're going to go to our shape format. We're going to go to our word art. So let text effects transform. And we happen to have a wave. So we have wave down and wave up. We want the wave down. Okay, now I'm going to stretch this out. And stretch it a little higher. And stretch it a little wider. Okay, so I'm going to take the shape handle right here. I'm going to drag it straight down. Now to get it to follow the shape, I'm going to take this right to the edge like this. Okay, now you can see it's not quite following the shape. So I'm going to rotate it a bit. If you're having trouble rotating, you can always go back here and control it that way. It looks like it's sitting on the edge, so it looks like it's following the shape. So it looks pretty good. Now again, you can adjust the handle here up or down until you get the right bend that you need. But I think taking it all the way down works pretty good. And I'm pretty happy with that. So what I'm going to do now is drop it here and maybe just stretch it out a bit. And I think it looks pretty good. I think it is following the shape pretty good. Now we have a little bit of darkness here, so we should probably do the same thing with the text. It should probably have the same kind of darkness. So we're going to go to text options. We're going to go to gradient fill. It'll put the green one in there because that's the last one we used. We just changed these to white. Take that one to white. Take that one to white. And these will just be a little darker gray. That looks pretty good. Maybe I'll just make them just a teeny bit lighter. Now that looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. So the banner here acts as your first layer. The text now acts as your second layer. Now we have to create the third layer, and that's the texture. Okay, so I'm going to make a copy of the banner. So now we want to create our nice textile pattern. And I think we're going to use the same one that we used on the stocking here because it's a nice pattern. It's a pretty obvious pattern. So let's go to pattern fill. And again, we want to go to black. And we're going to choose this one here, the zigzag. Okay, so we take that, we copy, paste as a picture. Okay, and we're going to go to our effects and go to artistic effects. We're going to go here and we're going to go to our nice little pastel smooth. Okay, we're going to take that all the way over. And again, you can see we're using the same pattern here. That looks pretty good. So we're going to copy this and paste it into this shape so we can make it semi-transparent. So we copy that. We click here. We go to our fill and we paste. And we're going to say clipboard and we get something that looks like that. Okay, so we'll take it maybe, again, about maybe between 65 to around 70% transparent. This one we don't need. We'll get rid of it. So we put this on top. Looks pretty good. We select all that. We copy and paste as a picture. Okay, now we're not going to apply any more artistic effect to this. I think it looks pretty good as it is. So what we're going to do is just modify the color. So we're going to go to picture format, go to color. I'm going to go right here on the color tone right to the end, make it a little more yellow green like that. Looks pretty good. And I'm going to go to corrections and I think I'll make it a little darker. Maybe this one right here. Brightness -20, contrast +20. I think it looks pretty good. So you can see the nice little weave pattern clearly happening there. Okay, let's go back to corrections, maybe just sharpen it up a bit. Now, just in case I didn't line up the pattern perfectly when I did this, I'm going to copy this and paste it into the shape here, and then I'm going to stretch it. So to make sure there's no uneven edges here, sometimes when you do that, you may not align the pattern quite right, and you might get a sharp edge right here. So I'm going to duplicate this. And what I'm going to do is take the transparency out. And I'm going to click on this. I'm going to copy that. And again, you want to make sure that you're not having any extra space. And you can see that we clearly don't. The bounding box is the perfect size. So we copy that and we go here and we do clipboard. And what I'm going to do is just, again, spin down to make sure that all edges are stretched out. And I think that looks pretty good. So sometimes when you're putting the pattern here, you don't quite line it up properly and you might have a little bit of an edge and that becomes pretty obvious. So if we do it this way, we can be sure that the pattern is going right to the edge of everything. Okay, we don't need this. Let's get rid of that. And we don't need that. We'll get rid of that and we'll take this. Okay, now what we need to do is create the frilly end of these. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to copy this, paste it as a picture, and I'm going to rotate it. Okay, and what I want is just this part right down here. So what I'm going to do is cut that. So I'm going to take this, drag a rectangle down, and I'm going to drag it down to about here. And I'm going to click on the scarf. I'm going to click on the rectangle, go to my shape, go to my merge, do a subtract. So I just get that. That's perfect. I don't need these edges here. So I'm going to grab a rectangle and I'll just trim those off. Merge, and subtract that. That's perfect. Okay. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to slice this up, and that's going to give our nice little frilly end. So to do that, I'm actually going to grab a cloud shape. Now we could grab a rectangle and make it very thin and slice it up that way, but I want uneven edges. So I'm going to grab a cloud shape. Just do this, drag it out like that. We don't need the line, and I'll make it as thin as I can, something like this. So I'm going to rotate it so it's kind of following that pattern. Okay, now all I've got to do is make a bunch of these. Now, what's going to be left is not the cloud pattern itself, the spaces between. So the cloud patterns are actually going to be cut out. So we go like this, and we don't have to be very perfect. And I'll just grab those, and I'll just duplicate them. And I'll grab those, and I'll just duplicate them. Okay, again, they don't have to be perfect. As a matter of fact, they work better if they're not perfect. Okay, so we select all that. We go to merge, we go to subtract, and there's our frilly end. Okay, so we can rotate it. Okay, so what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to flip it vertically and flip it horizontally. So they're going the same angle, but just in reverse. I'll make this top layer just a little bit smaller. I'm going to shrink it that way, and I'll shrink it down a bit that way. So there's a little more of an overlap. Okay, that looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do is take all this and just group it together. Now again, we don't need to create another one on the other side because again, that'll be off this slide, so you won't have to see it. You'll move that to the side. Now the last thing to do with our nice textile textures is to create the mittens that's going to go into the stocking. So here's an example of 5 different kinds of textile pattern fills. So each one starts off with a pattern fill, and then we copy and paste it and the pattern changes, and then we add a different artistic effect to it. So you can see through here what we're doing. So each one starts out with a different pattern fill, and that results in a different kind of textile pattern. So what we're going to do is we're going to create this one right here. So we're going to start off with this pattern fill, copy and paste it, modify it with cement, and then modify that with a nice pastel smooth, and we're going to use that as a pattern in here. Now mittens tend to be a little more rectangular in shape. I want to make mine a little more contoured. So I'm going to grab a wave shape, and I'm going to rotate it. And I'm going to flatten it out a bit. So you should probably figure out what I'm going to be doing here. So I'm going to duplicate that. I'm going to rotate it, flip horizontally. I'm going to bring that back. And then I'm going to select these. And I'm going to do a union on them. And I want the wider end to the top. So I'm going to rotate. And I'll just make it a little bit smaller. Okay, so that's the body of the mitt. Now we've got to create the part for the fingers. To do that, I'm going to just grab an oval. Draw an oval like this. I want the edge of the oval to touch the edge of the other shape. So stretching it out. Just kind of like that. It doesn't have to be perfect. As close to the edges as you can, like that. That looks pretty good. And we take that. We do union. We have that. Now for the thumb, I'm going to grab the delay shape. And we're going to rotate that. Drop it down about here. And I want to make sure that the corner here is touching this other shape. So there's no gap. So it touches. So it'll be quite smooth. So it's going to look like it's tapering down in here. I think it looks pretty good. And I'm going to take both of these. And we're going to do a union. And we have a mitt. Now the problem is, of course, the rotation handle. Rotation handle is down here. it has to be up there. All the rotation handles have to be to the top. Okay, so we're going to grab a rectangle. Just draw a rectangle, send it to the back. Now we click on this one because that's the primary one. Its rotation handles to the top. Then we hold the shift key. We click on the glove, and of course it'll take this rotation handle. So we do a merge and we do an intersect, and we get that. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now we don't need a line. And what I want to do is make that green. I want to see how big it is in relationship to the stocking. So I'm going to just move the scarf out of the way. I'm going to bring this to the front, and something like that looks pretty good. Okay, I'm happy with that. Okay, now I want to have a white tip here and a white bottom, kind of like what we did with the sock. So I'm going to duplicate that. I'm going to grab my stored data, and we're going to use that to do a little bit of slicing. So I'm going to rotate and just go to the top like that. And I'm going to make a copy of that. And we can just do something like this. Okay, so I'm going to take that. We go to our merge, and we're going to do a fragment. Get rid of the parts we don't want. Okay, we want these two, and I want them to be white. I'll line that up there, line that one up here. Looks pretty good. Okay, now I want to use the snowflake symbol again. Now, when you create your stocking here, and if you're going to use the same thing, then just keep an extra set aside so you can use over here. So I've got an extra set, and I'm going to go get it and bring it in. Okay, so we want our nice little snowflake symbol for this, so everything's kind of matching. Now, that's going the wrong way, so I'm going to go to my shape, text effect, and go to transform, and we want it to go the other way. And we'll just bring this in. And once again, we don't have to worry about what's going over. That's all going to get cut off, so we don't worry about what's going over. That looks pretty good. And I want to duplicate this. I want it for here, but I'm going to make them green. Go to my text, and I'd like to make them green. And I'll bring that in a bit. And again, whatever's going to go over, doesn't matter. It's going to get cut off. Okay, so that looks pretty good to me. I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, now we're not going to have to worry about the bottom here because the mitt's going to be going inside the stocking. So it's not like we have to finish this. So we're going to leave it rough so we don't have to worry about the bottom. Okay, so we have two layers now. We have our mitt layer, we have our symbol layer. Now we have to create a third layer, which is going to be the pattern. Okay, so I'm going to copy the mitt, go to our pattern fill, and make it black. And I want this one right here. Okay, it's called Diamond Grid. That looks pretty good. I'm going to copy that, paste it as a picture. Okay, so we get a thicker pattern. Now I want to soften that pattern a bit, so I'm going to go to my effects. I'm going to apply a cement to it. I really like that. It looks pretty good. And I'm going to copy that and paste that as a picture. What I want to do is break that pattern up. It's a little too strong, a little too geometric. So we're going to go back to our artistic effect. And we're going to go back to our pastel smooth, and we're going to drag this all the way over, and we get something like that. That's going to look quite nice. Now, as before, this pattern has to go into shape so we can make it transparent. So I'm going to just copy the glove again, and I'm going to copy this, copy, click on the glove, go to the fill, picture texture, one clipboard, maybe around 73% transparent. Okay, so it's like that. Now before we finish this, I'd like to put a nice little shadow between the glove and the thumb. There should be a little bit of shadow to show a little bit of a separation. To do that, I'm going to grab the wave. I'm going to take this shape handle down. I'm going to take this one to the right. I'm going to flatten that. I'm going to remove the outline, and I'm going to rotate it. Make it just a little bit thinner and smaller. And it's going to go just kind of like in there. Okay, I need to give it a gradient, so we'll click on gradient. we get our default gradient. We'll get rid of these two. I'm going to make this one a dark green, and I'll make this one a dark green. This one I'm going to make transparent. And I think what I want to do is spin this to about maybe 260. I'm going to take this right to the edge. Okay, so it looks like we have a little bit of a crease in here. So we got a separation between the mitt and the thumb. Okay, now we put this back on. The pattern is underneath the shadow. The shadow is actually on top, which is what we want. We want the shadow to be on top. If we put it underneath the pattern, you're not going to see it very well. Okay, it looks pretty good. Let's take all this. Let's copy it, paste it as a picture. Okay, we have that. And let's go to our picture format, color. Let's make it a little more yellow. Let's go to correction. And I'm going to just make it a little more dull. That looks pretty good. Now I'm going to add another artistic effect to this. So I'm going to go to artistic effect. I'm going to put a texturizer. Texturizer is going to kind of brighten it up a bit, make the pattern stand out a little more. So I'm going to click on that, take the scaling all the way over, and we have a really nice knitted pattern texture. Looks pretty good. Okay. Now we have our symbols going off, so we have to fix that. So again, we're going to have to copy and paste this into shape so that all this overflow gets cut off. Now before we do that, again, you have to look at the space. Okay, so let's say we use this as our object. We'll bring that to the front. Okay, so we want to copy and paste that into here. So we look at the bounding box, you can see it goes right to the object. We click here, look at the bounding box, we got a big space there, got space there. That's not going to do. So we have to right click and right to the bounding box. Right there, right to the edge, right there. Okay, doesn't appear to be any space anywhere else. That looks pretty good. Okay, so we copy that. We click here. We go to picture, texture fill. We go to clipboard, remove the transparency. Okay, and again, to make sure that we don't have anything overlapping, so we're going to take all the offsets down by 1. So just 1, 1, 1, 1. Okay, that ensures that there's nothing overhanging. Okay, that looks pretty good. So let's go back, picture format. Maybe we'll add a little more yellow to it. Maybe just a bit more. It looks pretty good. And how about we put a nice inner shadow? So let's go to our effects. Let's go to shadow. And let's say we'll go to the bottom right again. And we'll make that a dark green. And all I'm going to do is add a little bit of blur to it. And we get something that looks like that. So that looks pretty good. And again, we don't have to worry about the bottom. That's why we didn't bother finishing the bottom. And you're not going to see that bottom part. Okay, so we've made our nice stocking. We've made our nice scarf. And now we have our mitten. Now the last thing we're going to create that uses a textile is the hanger that's going to hang the stocking. So it's going to be just a nice little kind of V-shaped hanger. Now, before we get to that, let's clean this up. Let's get rid of some of this. Okay, so we're going to go to our shapes. And I'm going to go to my block arrow shapes. And I'm going to take this one here. This one, it says curved down arrow. Do something like that. And we have 3 shape handles. This one here, all the way to the right, flattens the arrowhead. This one to the left will get rid of the line. And we get something like that. That looks pretty good. Okay, so I'm going to make that red. And we're going to remove the outline. And I just might make it a little bit thinner like that. Okay, it looks pretty good. Okay, now we have to create our textile pattern. So we're going to duplicate that. We're going to our pattern fill. And I want to go to black again. And I think I'm going to use just this one right here. Wide upward. That looks pretty good. And of course we have to make that transparent, which means we have to duplicate it. And we have to copy that. And put it into here. We're going to go to picture texture, clipboard. And we're going to take that to maybe, I guess around 75, 78, somewhere in there. That looks pretty good. And we're going to put that on top. And I'm going to select both of these. I'm going to align them line the center, line middle. Okay, now we're going to copy and paste that as a picture. Okay, now I'd like to put a little inner shadow in there, so I'm going to go to bottom right inner shadow. I'll leave it at black. I'm going to increase the distance a bit and add a little blur. So it gives it a little more of a round feeling to it. So what I want this hanger to look like is that it's kind of like a cloth rope cord. So I think that looks pretty good. We're going to take that, we're going to copy that, paste it again. And with that one, we're going to apply a nice artistic effect. We'll just use texturizer. And you can see it has that feeling of like a rope cord. And maybe something like that. Looks pretty good. And then what I'd like to do is maybe sharpen it a bit. Not too much, just a little bit of sharpening. And if you put it there, you can see we have something that looks kind of like a rope cord. So stretch it out, we can make it smaller, but I think that's pretty good. Now, what I'd like to do with this rope cord is I like to soften it a bit. I like the edges to be softened. So what I'm going to do is go to my soft edges here. I'm going to spin up maybe about 3. Now you see when you spin up a little too high, you get this rough edges right here. So it's soft, but it's jaggy. That's not very good. So what I'm going to do is take that. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to place it right into this shape. And we'll get rid of the transparency. And when we do that, it's not so jaggy. So let me get rid of this one. And let me put that one there. So we got a soft edge because it is a rope cord, so it should be kind of soft and fuzzy. And if we need to, we can always go back and try sharpening it up a bit. And I think that looks pretty good. And of course, that would go to the back. You're not going to see the top of it. Of course, it's going to be off the slide, so it'll be something like this. I think for our textile patterns, that's about everything. Now, the last texture we want to create is we want to create some cedar. So it's going to go on top of the fireplace. So it's going to kind of cover everything. So we got to create our nice cedar. And again, that's going to be something that's fairly easy to do. Now to create our cedar, we're only going to be creating a small, teeny branch. And we're going to just be duplicating that. So it should be fairly quick. Okay, so what I want to do is grab a little wave shape. That's going to be like for the stalk. And then I'm going to make it a little more curvy, rotate it. Just bring it up a bit, a little bit thinner, and get rid of the outline. So I want this to be a gradient from a light brown to a dark brown. So we're going to put a gradient in it. We get our default. I'm going to set that to 0. We only need 2 stops. And I'm going to click on the light one here. I happen to have a dark and a light brown already made. So I'm going to click on the lighter brown, and I'm going to click on this one and make a darker brown. So something looks like that. Okay, light to dark. Okay, now we create the leaves. To do that, we're going to go to our shape. We're actually going to use a cloud shape because cedar leaves aren't very smooth and they have kind of a bumpy edge to them. So we kind of want to give that feeling. Something like this. Okay, we'll get rid of the line. I'm going to just make that a dark green, and I'm going to rotate it. Okay, so basically what we're doing is just creating tiny little leaves and just filling this little branch with them. Okay, something like that. Then we go here. Now, it doesn't look too much like cedar right now, but it will. And then we do another one here. And we'll do the same on the other side. We can copy and paste and do the other side quickly, but I don't want it to be too uniform. Okay, that's all we really need. And I'm going to get rid of the rest of the stem. We don't need the rest there. So I'm going to cut that off. Perfect. And I'm going to select this and I'm going to group it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shrink this really small, and then I'm going to start duplicating them so they kind of come into branches and then eventually into like a cedar spray. And what we're going to do with that is we're going to copy it and paste it as a picture, as a small thing, and then we're going to add a film grain to it. A film grain is a nice rough texture to it, and cedar has kind of a rough texture to it. So we're going to do that, and then we're going to stretch it out big. Now, normally you don't want to stretch your pictures big because they get blurry, but in this case, with the film grain on top of this, it's going to work out really well. Give us a nice rough cedar texture. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is just shrink it. Something like that. So I'm going very small, and we're going to just duplicate it. So just creating branches. And you can flip them if you want so they're not all so perfect. So you kind of get the idea what I'm doing. I'm overlapping. Okay, it looks pretty good. And now we create our little branches. Now, right now it doesn't look like cedar. It looks more like spruce or pine or something like that. But you'll see how it's going to work. It'll be pretty good. Okay, so we do the other side. Now we, of course, could just copy and paste this on the other side. I don't want them to be so even. So I'm going to just manually do them. And we want them in between. So we don't want the branches to be on the same level. They should be slightly in between each other. Okay, that looks pretty good. We're going to take all that. We're going to group it. Now, I'll just warn you right now that when you start creating a lot of little things like this, and you duplicate them, sometimes your computer will start running a little slower because it's a lot of objects, especially if you have to move them around, because it's a lot of objects that the computer has to redraw. So you get a bit of a slowdown. Don't worry about that. That's just the way it kind of works. Okay, so what I'm going to do with that is I want to put a drop shadow. And it looks pretty good. Maybe I'll just take the blur down a bit. Okay, it looks pretty good. Now, what I'm going to do with this is duplicate it. So we go from a branch into what we call a spray. Okay, so something like that. And the shadow helps keeping the different branches separated. So that's what the drop shadow is for. Okay, it looks pretty good. Maybe I'll do another one here. And maybe I'll flip that one, just so it's slightly different. So it's not all going the same general direction. And maybe do one more. Something like that. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. Okay, now what I'm going to do with this is select them all, copy it, and paste it as a picture. Okay, again, it's very tiny. Now, obviously, this has to be much bigger for our use. But what I want to do now is put the effect film grain. And film grain at a small size will be small. And when we stretch this, the film grain will stretch with it. And it will give us our nice mottled, speckled look that cedar actually has. So what I'm going to do is go to my effects. Click here. We want to go to film grain. Okay. And maybe about 30. Looks pretty good. Let's go to our picture format. Let's go to color. And I'm going to make it a little more on the yellow side. Okay, now what I'm going to do here is go to my corrections, and I'm going to sharpen it. Okay, now you can see right off the bat, we're getting this kind of mottled kind of texture look that cedar kind of has. Okay, now I'm going to rotate this because we actually want it to go this way. And now I'm going to stretch it to the size we need it. And when we do that, if you take a look at it, you can see it has a really nice cedar texture to it. And that's because we made it small, applied the film grain, stretched it. So it kind of blurs a bit. I kind of like that. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this. And I'm going to apply an inner shadow to that. And I'm going to make it a brown. And I'm going to increase the distance and the angle, move it around. And I'm going to soften it. Okay, why? To give it a little more color. Okay, I'm going to take the angle, I think, and I'm going to bring the brown towards the bottom. Now what the brown does is just add a little more color, and quite often we get cedar, some of it's kind of on the edge of dying, so it turns a little bit brown, but it adds a little bit of color to this. Okay, I'm going to do this one more time. I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to rotate, flip it vertically, just so again it's not quite at the same angle. And What I'm going to do with that is change the angle of the color there. Just bring it down again. Maybe bring the blur up a bit. Okay, that looks pretty good. Okay, now I'm going to select all that. I'm going to group it. And I'm going to copy and paste it as a picture. Okay. I'll just take this, move it aside for now. Okay, now this, we're going to go back to our picture format corrections. We'll make it just a little bit sharper again. It looks pretty good. And we're not going to need the top part, so I'm going to cut the top part off. We only need about this much right here. So I'm going to click on that. I'm going to click on that. We're going to go to shape format and retract. Okay, so this is all we're going to actually need. So this is going to go right to the slide edge. We can also flatten this out a bit if we like. So something like that. The last thing I want to do here is I want to add a little more shadows to, let's say, the mitt and to the scarf. Okay, again, shadows give you depth and they help with the idea of 3D and they help with the idea of light sources. So I'm going to click on the scarf. I'm going to duplicate it and I'm going to get rid of the frill. We don't need the frill. Okay, so remember this is still a shape, so it's a picture in a shape. So I'm going to go to my fill. I'm going to go solid fill. I'm going to make it black, put it on top, and do what we did before. We're going to make it highly transparent. And I'm going to go to my effects, and I want to go to my soft edge, something like this. Okay. And maybe we'll just rotate it a bit. And you can see that adds just a little bit of a dimension to it. It just prevents it from looking so flat, and it makes it look like there's a light source on it. And then when we set everything up, we can still rotate it and move the shadow around. I like to do the same thing with the mitt, so I'm going to duplicate that. And again, that's the shape, so it's a picture in a shape. So we're going to solid fill. We want black. Make it highly transparent. Put it back on. And we'll do the same thing. Go to our effects. Create a very large soft edge to it. Okay, something like that. And then we just move it. And again, you can see the effect that has. It just makes it look a little more three-dimensional. Okay, let's take a look at everything in the slideshow. So again, we've got light and shadow. It all looks really, really good. Okay, so the last thing is to create our fake fireplace with our wall and then put everything together. So this is the brick wall I want to use for my fireplace. Now you can see it's kind of an old rustic brick wall, and that's what I'm trying to give in the impression of the fireplace, an old-fashioned rustic brick fireplace. Now you could of course just go find a picture of a fireplace and use that, but I'm going to show you how to take this and turn it into what looks like a fireplace. Okay, now the first thing we have to do is you have to look at the size of the bricks in relationship to the size of the stocking. So the bricks are very tiny here, which would make the stocking extremely large. So we can't have that. So what we have to do is crop the brick wall and then stretch it out so the bricks are more in proportion to the size of the stocking. So I'm going to right click, I'm going to crop, maybe about here, and I'm going to crop up, maybe about there. Click on the brick and stretch it out. Now the bricks are more in proportion to the size of the stocking, so I like that. Okay, I'm going to crop it down to about the 2 marker here. So I'm going to right click, crop. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to create an edge at the top here. So there's always like a ledge on a fireplace. So I'm going to duplicate this. And let's see, I think I'm going to use these bricks for the ledge. So I'm going to right click, crop. Go down to them right about here and go up about like that. I think it looks pretty good. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put an inner shadow and an outer shadow. Now, you know you can't have 2 shadows on the same thing. So we'll do the inner shadow first. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to go down here to the bottom one here. And we're going to take the distance up a bit, and we'll take the transparency down a bit, maybe a little bit of blur. Because this is overhanging, so we should have a drop down shadow there. Okay, so you know you can't have 2 shadows, so we have to copy and paste as a new image, a new picture, and we'll get rid of that one. And we'll put this one here. And now we can add a outer shadow. So I'm going to go to the top here. And for the distance, maybe about there. Take the transparency down. Maybe add a little bit of blur. And we get something that looks like that. So it looks like an edge. Now you don't have to worry about the shadow that's coming off. You don't have to worry about anything that's coming off the edge here, because that's all going to be covered up. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Now we have to create our nice little opening in the fireplace here. Now to do that, I'm going to just take a rectangle. I'm going to draw a rectangle about where I think the opening should be, maybe somewhere about here. Okay, now I'm going to put the rectangle here. We're going to take this wall here, copy, paste it into there, and that will be the inside. The bricks should be a little bit more smaller as they're receding deeper into the fireplace. So I'm going to click on this, copy, click here, picture, texture. We get that. Take away the outline, don't need the outline. Okay, now the only problem is, of course, when you paste a picture into a shape, it squishes the picture to fit the shape. So if you put that here, you can see the bricks are way too small. So we want the bricks to be smaller because this is recessed in, but not that small. So what we're going to do is tile this, and maybe I'll make the scale 75%. So it's a little bit smaller, but not that terribly small. Okay, now I think I'd like this to be darker because, again, it's recessed in. So we'll go to picture format, we'll go to corrections, and maybe I'll make this a little bit darker. Something like that. I think that looks pretty good. And now I'm going to do, again, an inner shadow and an outer shadow. So inner shadow first. So I want the shadow to be at the top and to the left. So we want to go to this one. And I'm going to take a big distance, a large distance like this. We want it to be darker. And of course we want to blur. Maybe even more of a distance. Maybe not quite so dark. Okay, so we have that, which looks like a recess in. Now I want to put an outer shadow so it softens the bricks around it. We don't want a sharp, deep edge like that. So I'm going to copy, paste as picture. We'll move that one out of the way, put this one back. And now we'll put a outer shadow. And again, I want one that goes to the left and to the top. So I'm going to click on that one. And we're not going to have a very big shadow, but just enough to give the edge of the bricks a little bit of three-dimensional quality to them. And maybe darken it a bit, maybe a teeny bit of a blur. Okay, so we have something that looks like that, and it kind of looks like an opening in the fireplace. Now you see we have some hard edges here. So what we can do is we can go to the soft edges here and just soften the edges a bit. We lose a little bit of the shadow here, so we can just stretch it out a bit. So make sure the shadows go right to the edge. And again, anything off is not going to show anyway, so we don't have to worry about that. So that looks pretty good. Maybe I'll take the distance just up a bit. Okay, now again, your stock is going to be covering most of that. So it's not like you're going to be seeing a lot of that anyways. Okay, but I think that looks more like a fireplace. Now, the next thing to do is take all our individual pieces and put it all together. So now we have all our pieces. Now it's time to assemble them into a nice little scene. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is take the cedar and put it up here on the edge. I don't want to cover the edge completely, so I want it up maybe about there. I'll put a nice little drop down shadow. So we're going to go here. We'll do outer shadow. So we'll have it drop straight down a bit and maybe take the distance just a teeny bit. Make it maybe a little darker. And I think I'd like to duplicate that. I don't want to cover the ledge too much. And I think what I'm going to do with that one is just squish it down a bit. And I think that looks pretty good. Maybe I'll take the distance down a bit in that so it's not so obvious. And let's take a look at that. And I think that looks pretty good. So we can see that we have a nice ledge, but we have some nice cedar on top of the ledge. It looks pretty good. Okay, next thing to do, of course, is assemble the parts into the stocking. Okay, so what I'm going to do is bring up another panel. I'm going to go to my shape format here. I'm going to bring up my selection pane. Now, the selection pane is very useful when you're trying to organize things. So what I want to do is start naming things so I know what everything is, because we're going to have to change the order quite a bit here. Okay, so then the first thing I'm going to do is ungroup the stocking. So I'm going to do a Control Shift G. Okay, now this is the stocking shadow. So I'll just call it stock shadow. This is the stocking, so we'll call that the stocking. So you can see it's very beneficial to name all your objects. Much easier to control that way. Okay, so this is the candy cane. This is our scarf. I'll call that scarf 1 because we are going to be making another one. And this is our mitt, so I'll call that mitt 1 because we are going to have another one. What I want to do is make the stocking maybe a little bit smaller. So I'm going to group that again, and I'm going to just bring it down a bit. And maybe just a little bit wider. So we have more room to put the mitt in there. Okay, maybe just a little smaller. And just a little wider. I think that looks pretty good. Okay, I'm going to ungroup it again. Okay. Okay, so we have to click on this. That's our trim. We'll call that outer trim. So now the mitt has to go behind this and behind the stocking. Okay, so now we have to move the mitt behind the outer trim. And it's still not going to do it. So where does it have to go? It has to go behind the stocking. So that looks pretty good. Okay. And I might just make that a little bit smaller. Okay, I think I kind of like that. Now I want to have another one in there. So I'm going to duplicate that. And we'll call that mitt 2. So this one has to go underneath mitt 1. So I'm going to drag it down. It's now underneath. And I'm also going to rotate it. So I'm going to go to Picture, Rotate, Flip Horizontally. And maybe I'll rotate that. Okay, and I want to keep them in there. Maybe I'll rotate this one a bit. And you want to keep them, of course, within the sock. And I'll just drop that down a bit like that. Okay, so I want to make sure you can still see that they're mitts. Okay, now we have to work with the candy canes. So I'm going to duplicate this because we're going to need more than one. Okay, now I want the candy cane to be hanging over the edge here. So what I like to do is make sure when I cut the candy cane so it fits the edge that it follows this curve. Now I'm going to click on the trim here, and I think what I'm going to do is just take the soft edge down just a little bit. Maybe it's a little too soft. Right now it's 3 points. I'll just take it down at 2. Okay, that's a little better. Okay, now I want to keep that curve of the trim. So to do that, I'm going to have to go to my shapes. I'm going to go down to my flow chart, grab the same shape I created that with. That's this one, stored data. And we're going to stretch it out, and we want to keep the same angle we can. And I think that looks pretty close to that. So I'm going to put one of these aside because we'll need them again. Now what I want to do is use this to cut into the candy cane. Now you can see it doesn't cover the whole candy cane, and I don't want to stretch this down. If I stretch it down, well then I'm going to lose that curve. It'll be a much deeper curve. So what I'm going to do is grab a rectangle, and that's going to just cover the rest of that. So I'm going to select both of these shapes, go to do a union. Okay, now I can click on the candy cane, and I can click on the shape, and do shape, merge, and do subtract. And now the candy cane fits in there pretty good. So it really looks like it's tucked inside. Okay, and maybe we'll do a little drop shadow on that. And you can play with the angle. Maybe like that looks a little better. Okay, let's call this candy cane 2. I'll just call it CC2. Make it a little easier. Okay, let's duplicate this one. We'll have another one. Let's duplicate this, and I'm going to cut it really close up here. Okay, now I'm going to grab a rectangle, and we want to cover all that. We want to do a nice union in that. Then we click on the candy cane, and we click on the shape, and we do a subtract, and we get that. And what I'm going to do with that one is rotate it. So I'm going to go to Picture, Rotate, Flip Horizontally, and it's going to hang over a little bit more. We need to put a nice shadow on it. So maybe I'll just take a drop down shadow, take my angle, move it around, see where do I like it. I think I like it maybe there, and maybe increase the distance a bit. And what I'm going to do is actually change the color. I think I'm going to actually use a dark brown. It just makes it a little more transparent. I think I like that better. Okay, so let's call this one, we'll call it CC3. Okay, now let's take another candy cane. I think I like to put this one in the back, between mitt 1 and mitt 2. So let's take that and let's drag that between mitt 1 and mitt 2, about there, and we'll put this kind of like this. Okay, we'll rotate it. Adds a little bit of dimension, and we'll just kind of go like this. I think that looks pretty good. And what we'll do is we'll put a drop down shadow on that. Something like that looks pretty good. Let's see if the brown color looks good. Pretty good in that. It kind of just picks up the coloring on the candy cane. Okay, we'll call this CC4. Okay, that looks pretty good. And maybe I'll take the transparency up a bit. Okay, now I'm going to take this candy cane and I'm going to rotate it so it's actually more like a candy cane stick rather than candy cane. And I'm going to go to my format, rotate it horizontally, and I'm going to put that behind everything. So we'll call this CC5, and we'll drag that right to the bottom. And we'll put it maybe like this, and we'll rotate it. I think that looks pretty good. And then maybe we should have one more candy cane. So let's take this one. Let's rotate that one. Rotate it more this way. We're going to send that one right to the back. Send it right to the back. And we're going to just kind of rotate it like this. Have it come out like that. Maybe we can have one more over here. Let's take this one. And let's rotate that one. We'll send that one to the back. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. I don't think we have to rename all these. I think we kind of get the idea what they are. Okay, let's bring the shadow back. And I think it looks like we have to bring it to the front. So let's put our shadow back in there. Okay. Now we're going to take this. We're going to put this to the back. We're going to send that to the back. Okay, now what we have to do is select everything and group it. So I've got all the goodies. I'm going to group them. Okay, now let's put this on the fireplace. It looks pretty good. And we want to rotate this a bit so it's kind of looks like it's hanging. And I think I'm going to make the whole thing a little bit smaller so it fits a little better. Okay, that looks pretty good. Okay, now that we've got all this on the fireplace, it's time to kind of deepen some of the shadows here. You can see that the fireplace is kind of a strong dark color, so I think we should deepen the shadows and everything here. So I'm going to click here. I'm going to click on the shadow. You can see I got the stock shadow here. And what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to go to my fill and make it a little bit stronger. In reference to the fireplace brick, it has to be a little bit stronger. I'm pretty happy with that. And you can see it makes it look a little more three-dimensional. I'm going to click on this mitt. I'm going to click on the shadow. Now, if you're not sure what you have here, when you're clicking on things, if you're not sure, you can click the eyeball to turn them off. So I know that that is the shadow. Okay, so I know that's the shadow, so I'm going to deepen that shadow and maybe just move it a bit. And I want to do the same with the other mitt. So with the other mitt, that's the shadow right there. So I want to do the same with that. Deepen the shadow. That looks pretty good. And there's our edge right there. So I think I'm going to have to make this a little bit smaller. Make sure it fits. Let's check that in the slideshow. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. Now let's do our scarf. Let's take our scarf. I want to rotate it a bit. Of course, this is a very long scarf. I mean, we could copy this as a picture and just slice the top off, but I'm going to keep it the way it is. And I'm going to just rotate the scarf a bit. Now I actually want this to be above the cedar. Okay, so we can see that's the cedar. So the scarf has to be above the cedar. Okay, I think I'd like to make the scarf just a little bit thinner, like that. And I think I'd like to duplicate it. We're going to call that scarf 2. I want this one here to be behind, like that. That's perfect. Now I'm going to click on our stocking. You see it's now called a group. We'll just call that stocking. Okay, that's pretty good. And this one's going to go on top. So I'm going to take this one. I'm going to take this one here and just bring it a little higher up, kind of like that. I'm going to take this one and I want it to kind of go over, but I don't want it to go over the top part of the stocking. I just want this bottom part to go over the foot. I don't want this part to cover the top of the stocking. So what I'm going to do is copy and paste that as a picture. Now you notice that it shrunk, okay? Anytime you copy and paste a picture that's bigger than a slide, PowerPoint reduces to the size of the slide. So we got to put this back to its original size. So we're going to go here to properties, and you see it's been reduced to 77%. We want to go back to 100. Okay, now what I want to do is cut this part off here, and I'm going to have it go over the foot. So I'm going to take a rectangle, and we're going to go up here, and we're going to cut it off about there. So I'm going to click on the scarf, click on the rectangle, and go to my shape format, merge, and we'll subtract. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm going to have this one go behind the stocking. So this is scarf 2, and I want it to go behind the stocking. So I'm going to drag it behind the stocking. So it's below, like that. And I'm going to take this and put it above the stocking. Just trying to line it up like that, so it kind of matches. So it gives a little bit of dimension to it. So you can see the scarf's kind of going underneath and coming on top like this. So I think it looks pretty good. I think we click on scarf number 1. I'm going to just move it up a bit, so it's more like that. Okay, now let's take a look and see what that looks like in the slideshow. So we have our nice scarf here. We have our nice mitts. We have our candy cane. There's our stocking. We have our old-fashioned rustic brick fireplace. Okay, so with the stocking group selected, I'm going to put a nice drop shadow on that one. And because it's a group, it applies to the group. It doesn't apply to the individuals within the group. It applies to the whole group. So it's basically the outside. So I'm going to go to my shadows here, and I want an outer shadow. I'm going to take this one. I want it to go kind of up. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to move the distance off a bit like this. Maybe a little bit of blur. And maybe make it just a teeny bit darker. Let's take a look at that slideshow. You can see we're casting a nice shadow. I think that all looks pretty good. Maybe just take the distance a little bit more. And maybe just make it a little teeny bit darker. Now the last thing I want to do with these objects is to start darkening certain things. For example, the second mitt here, I think its shadow should be a little darker. So I'm going to click here, and I got to make sure I've got the right one. So I turn the eyeball off. There it is. I can see that's mitt 2, and that's the shadow because I can see it turning it on and off. So I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to just make that a little bit darker so it stands out more. And maybe this shadow, that's the stock shadow. So maybe I'll make that just a teeny bit darker too. Again, it just adds volume. Maybe I'll move it a bit like that. And it just gives a nice three-dimensional quality to it. So maybe I'll do the same with the scarf here. And with the scarf, I want to get the shadow. So there it is. So I'm going to click its eyeball. Maybe I'll just make that a teeny bit darker, not much. Okay, so let's take a look at this one more time. And you can see by deepening the shadows, we get a strong sense of light and shadow, which is very important when you're trying to create realistic things. So we have a strong sense of light coming in from the left, shadows going more to the right, and it looks quite realistic. Okay, the last thing to do, of course, is to create our text area here, and we try to make that look like some type of textile material too. To create the background, I'm going to draw a rectangle, the size of the text area. Now we don't need an outline. And I'm going to make it this green here. And of course, in order for this to work, we have to have a pattern fill. So I'm going to duplicate that. I'm going to go to my pattern fill. I'm going to choose this wave one, and I think I'm going to change the color to this bright green, like that. And of course, we need to make the pattern fill transparent, so of course we have to copy and paste it. So I'm going to duplicate this. Okay, so we're going to copy this one, and we're going to paste it into this one. So we go to Picture, Texture, Clipboard, and that gives us the ability to make it transparent. We'll go maybe around 70%. Okay, we don't need this one here. We're going to take this one on top. Looks pretty good. We're going to select both of them. We're going to copy and paste as a picture. And we'll get rid of this one. We don't need the background here. Put this back here and just stretch it out, make sure it fits. And we're going to go to Artistic Effects. We're going to do the pastel again. And I'm going to drag it up to about around 70-75%. Okay, looks pretty good. And let's take a look at that. And when we look at that, you kind of get like almost like a terry cloth kind of texture, but I think it looks pretty good. And the last thing we're going to do is we're going to put a drop shadow on the outside. So we're going to go to Shadow. We want it to go to the left right here. So we're going to click on this one. And we'll just make the distance a little higher. Just a teeny bit. Take the transparency down a bit. So we just have a nice little soft edge. It kind of softens the brick here at the edge. Let's take a look at that. And we have something that looks like that. And that's pretty well it. So that makes a perfect Christmas slide. That makes a perfect old-time Christmas slide background. Now my recommendation is, if you want to use this whole thing as a slide background, is to copy and paste it as a picture. That makes it a lot smaller file, and you don't have to worry about individual pieces. So we're going to do that here. So the first thing I'm going to do is zoom out so I can see everything. So I'm going to click on something, and then I'm going to use Control A to select everything. It's a lot easier than trying to put a selection net around it. So now we've got it all selected. I'm going to copy it, Control C. We're going to go to a new slide, and I'm going to paste it. And I want to paste it as a picture. Now when I do that, of course, PowerPoint shrinks the image to fit the slide. So you can see it's shrunk quite a bit. So we go up here to size. So we go to where it says scale, height, and width. Now you want to make sure the lock aspect ratio is checked. It is here. And I'm going to put that back to 100%. I only have to do one because the other one will be done too. Okay, so now we just got to put it back to the top corner of the slide here, like line them up like this. Looks pretty good. Now we just got to right click, crop, and we just crop to the edge of the slide. So it should snap to the edge of the slide. And there you have it. Okay, so now we have a nice slide background. It's going to be a much smaller size than the vector images of the original. So now you can just place that on the Slide Master or wherever you like. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Went on a little longer than I expected, but I think you've got some pretty good ideas now how to create textile textures. So if you're doing anything with Clipart, you're using textiles, you might as well take the extra step and try to make it look like the real textile effect. Okay, so again, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, give it a like. If you have any comments, leave them in the comment section. If there's anything you didn't quite catch, again, leave that in the comments. We'll try to get back to you. Okay, so again, thank you for watching, and we hope to catch you on the next video.